It's a trucking, transportation, and lifestyle show like none other.
Man, you call this a life?
Road Gang Radio is back for another half hour of the best transpo show in the known universe.
We come in peace. Well, actually, we're falling to pieces.
Let's see if we can achieve liftoff, Phone Master Dre.
Woo! We're lifting off to another great interview on Road Gang Radio, live from the Fast Sports Studios. Ain't that right, Jimmy?
Oh, my friend, you are correct. And maladaptive is the word that I brought up when Lindsay first joined us in the show. It was a word that was brought up before. It's at the heart of a lot of what we're going to be talking about this morning. Good morning to you, Lindsay, by the way.
And to you, good sir. I'm excited to dive deep with Cynthia next.
By the way, Cynthia, who Lindsay refers to, Cynthia Rivard, is a leadership and intuition expert, an author, and an environmental advocate. She ethically practices proactive solutions supporting both business and humanity into the future. In her books, Hope for a New Era and the one we're talking about today, A New Breed of Leader, Cynthia is inviting you on a journey of self-discovery and expansion for purpose, leadership, and concession-building skills, fostering the heart-led, compassionate communities we need in order to heal and create peace. She believes in the power of compassionate communication and egoless leadership. It's possible. It is difficult. However, she does teach it to drive improvements in society. If you want to learn more, go to CynthiaRivard.com. That's RIVARD.com. And all proceeds from her books will be donated to globalrisingtide.org, the purpose-driven conscious leaders community that she founded. It is contributing to raise human consciousness and end global warming. Without further ado, it is our pleasure to welcome Cynthia aboard Road Gang Radio. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here with you all this morning. Thank you for having me.
Cynthia, your work is my bag. I love what you're talking about, but you come at it with such a balance. So I want to start a little basic here, just for anybody listening. You know, I'll say the naysayer who's like, oh, the spiritual, the woo side, whatever. But you are not that. You are based. You find a way to balance it all between. We talked about this earlier. Spiritual teacher, but also business strategist. That right already grounds the first thing, I feel like. And
yes,
so
ma'am.
Yeah, and you're talking emotion, not from the top down, but the inside out. So if you could walk us through, how do those two things, spiritual teacher and strategist, how do those two parts of you work together instead of competing?
Well, first of all, what we were going to discuss today was written completely from a secular lens. None of my spiritual teachings come out in the book, but being a spiritual teacher, I am guided in what I share and really passionate about how we can each help make a difference in our families and our communities. And I'll just add, because the word leader turns a lot of people off. We don't see ourselves that way if no one's ever handed us a title. When I talk about leadership, it's individualistic, micro leadership in our daily actions. We all have influence over other people. Even if we're not interacting with them directly in person, we have influence over others. And that's what I talk about in intentional leadership. So it applies to everyone in your audience if they're open to just thinking about it with this lens and, making intentional actions to impact others in a positive way.
There is a term for it in some religious communities, and I think applies really lovely to secular behavior, the idea of evangelization by example. There are plenty of people who proselytize ideas and often espouse core tenets of philosophy and love sharing those with people. There are other people, however, who believe those things and then say, how can I put those words into action? And by simply doing that in my own personal life, provide an example, even if it's only for the small group of people that surround us in the workforce or in our family lives or in our communities, say like, the club that we belong to, the advocacy organization that we're a part of. It really, it seems to be that a lot of what a new breed of leader is the reminder that we are being asked to walk that which we talk and to practically be able to develop that skill, to understand that we are that our actions are a manifesto for our beliefs.
Absolutely. And I like to say, of course, I have some very strong held beliefs, but you don't have to believe in a greater power to just believe in humanity and being a good person. And that's really what it's all about, is how do your actions impact others, and how can you help more people through your just day-to-day interactions with them.
So day-to-day interactions with people are obviously they've gotten to be difficult, which is why it has kind of shoved people into their homes, and it's isolated us, and it's just a vicious cycle that we have to obviously reprogram. But you talk so much about, and I really like this, how our dysfunction is actually evolutionary. I loved that, Cynthia, because that feels actually hopeful instead of hopeless. And it reminds me that this is sort of part of a process. We go through these cycles where dysfunction leads to evolution, and then we sort of hopefully swing the pendulum back and meet in the middle. So with that said, I'm curious to you how we sort of, as it pertains to, how do we tell the difference between a survival response and an intuitive response? Because I feel like they feel the same in the body sometimes, but if we're able to take a moment and figure out, is this a knee jerk, or is this a time for me to sort of reevaluate, I think that can help sort of decipher the dysfunction, if that makes sense. So what is the difference between a survival response and an intuitive response?
So we have a lot of survival instincts that you see playing out in our society. And we always have. I think it's really hot right now with all of the discourse and division that we're seeing, in social media and on the news around political and religious beliefs and that kind of thing. But it's always been like this, because one of our most basic survival instincts it's known as the fear response, but it actually in our modern society does not show up or feel like fear most of the time, but it's a subconscious resistance to change. And if we feel like there's a lot of change going on around us, or we're afraid of change, maybe what's going on with the economy or a threat of extreme weather events, there's a lot of things that our subconscious, not just our conscious mind, but our subconscious is taking in and feeling really bombarded by, that feels like massive change and threats. And when we sense that, we put up resistance, which people know as the fear, fight, or flight response. And how we see that playing out, if you look on social media as an example, and this is just, remind me to circle back about the intuitive, noticing your intuition or feeling into it. But if you can recognize this instinctual response, what I advocate for is just becoming aware of it, not just in yourself, so that you can choose differently, because it's very easy when you recognize it. That's the trick. You have to recognize that that's what's happening. Then you can choose a different path or a different reaction. But you can also recognize it in others and therefore have compassion for their overreacting, perhaps, their argumentative nature. So one of the instincts we see playing out on social media is this horrendous fight response. People really name-calling and throwing people of differing beliefs under the bus, rather than trying to have diplomatic discourse to try and understand each other. You see, online's a bad example, I suppose, but it's just one that I think most people have access to. Mm-hmm. Maybe you see it at the Thanksgiving table when you're around people you're not normally around. People have this innate reaction to fight for their beliefs that they feel are being threatened, rather than just taking a breath. If you recognize that need to argue, just taking a breath and telling yourself to be curious. Just ask questions, learn, be curious, rather than judgmental about those differing viewpoints. And depending on your relationship with that other person, it can help lower their resistance and their ability to listen to you as well.
Jim, curious instead of combative. Curious instead of combative. I'm not looking at you directly, Jim. Curious instead of combative. That's in general. I'm saying it to myself.
No.
I'm saying it to us all. It's a good pivot.
Pivot. I don't feel like I'm being having that directed at me. I do have something I wanted to bounce off you, given what you and Lindsay have kind of opened up here. I've often found that I'm able to kind of let the rage and the nastiness of what happens online roll off my back, but it took a long time to get there. And I think it might have something to do with the fact that people are so self-loathing over what I call the daily cowardice of life, in that people are so confrontationally adverse sometimes in real life that either they take it out on people whom they know they can safely do it to, family members, or they do it online where there is no threat of any genuine real pushback. They can hit the mute button, they can hit the block button, and all that kind of stuff. And it brings us further away from actually doing what you're talking about, which is actually crossing the border and meeting somebody for what might be a spirited conversation, might be friction that produces a synthesis of ideas, but it often feels like that people's rage is as much from a place of self-loathing at their own inability to stand up for themselves as it is from an attempt to want to attack everybody around themselves. They're like lashing out because they can't truly be themselves and they don't know how to get there. And like I said, in kind of going through the material that you have and you've talked about, I couldn't escape the fact that that urge to individualism is not really an urge towards becoming a complete person and a unique individual, but towards becoming an authoritarian, kind of a mini despot where the world must kind of adhere to what I want because I can't deal with the stress of other humans. Sorry I unpacked that on you, but you get me excited with your thoughts.
That's beautiful. I love some of the points you made there, and there definitely is a safety online that we don't feel in person, and someone will feel empowered to say a lot more online than they may in person, because we do have, a lot of us have an instinct to avoid conflict if possible and not speak up at all. And that's more of the freeze response versus the fight response. When we're in person and it could end up being a conflict, we may choose to hide our head or not say anything or pretend an issue doesn't exist, hoping it just goes away because we want to avoid conflict. And that's more of a freeze response than the fight response, which feels very easy to get into online without feeling physically threatened, obviously.
So I'd love to give to we have a lot of truck drivers, a big majority of our audience, truck drivers sitting in their cabs and their trucks now, and this all sounds great and we can identify, but it's like, okay, but then what do I do? What next? And this can actually go back to the intuition as well. But your book talks so much about emotional intelligence, and so if you could answer this question and then maybe give some tips here. So why you think emotional regulation is really a missing skill in our culture right now, and with that, a quick reset that we can use in the moment when I'm sitting there and I feel myself about to spiral. It's it's just a check-in that helps us shift. So why do you think emotional regulation is the missing skill in our culture?
Absolutely. Well, so this can nicely tie in with your question about intuition, because you have to kind of be aware and notice if you're feeling something more gut related, tugging you in a different direction, like something doesn't feel right about this circumstance or whatever. And emotional intelligence is just the ability to recognize and regulate your emotions, and that is a skill available to everyone. It's not something that some people are born with and others are not, like we think about IQ. It is something that we constantly have to be aware of and practice, but all it is building your awareness. If you recognize that our thoughts create our emotions, then if you're feeling something that you don't want to feel, like you're about to erupt or you're feeling tense or anxious, check in with yourself and think about what thought you just had that created that feeling in your body, because it's always tracked back to a particular thought. And then if you recognize what it is about that thought that's causing the emotion, you can choose a more neutral thought. And this is a skill. It's not the first time you try it. It's not easy. And you could just start by taking a pause and a deep breath. And that's, an immediate tool available to everyone to try and regulate your emotions. But as you're taking that breath, think about, well, what's a more neutral perspective? Instead of taking what this guy is saying personally, because it's always more about them than about you, how can you shift what you're thinking about the circumstance or what they're saying so you don't find it as offensive, and therefore you can listen and respond to the conversation differently?
I am going to kind of I took some notes after kind of going through your material. And by the way, if you're just joining us, Cynthia Rivard is the author of New Breed of Leader, A Guide to Healing Humanity and Peaceful Revolution. She joins us this morning on Road Gang Radio. I took some notes here, and this is my way of saying, the question I'm asking you as I read this note to you is, do I get it, of what you're kind of getting at here?
Okay.
So I wrote down hostility, combat, and upheaval. You used the term maladaptive. That is a carefully chosen word, because hostility, combat, and upheaval are traits that are necessary in an environmentally hostile world, when the saber-toothed tiger can eat your head, and when, if you don't stay on the run, you die. But things have changed, and because mankind's greatest trait, what actually invents us as humans, is choice. As far as we can discern, few, if any other species, have that ability not to act on evolutionary impulse. And by making different choices, we can change the direction of our evolution. Am I understanding what the overall goal here is? To remember that just because something was programmed into you by earlier times does not mean that that programming applies to where we are now.
100%. That was beautifully recapped. We needed those survival instincts back in the day, and they can still come in handy. I always advocate that you really do a check-in, and are you feeling that resistance? Because there really is something there. Do your due diligence. Is there something there that could be a threat? But 99% of the time, we find that, no, there really isn't a physical threat. And if it is some kind of a risk of failure, we'll determine, but it's worth it. You still may fall into the survival instincts if you're not aware of them. And that's when the building awareness is so critical, because we do always have choice to choose a different thought and a different reaction or a different response instead of a gut reaction.
Cynthia, we're talking with Cynthia Rivard, and I think there's something that you believe, which I believe is so basic and also one of the most profound things we can talk about here, Cynthia, and that is that leadership is not a title, it's an energy. I love that, whether the word energy meaning it's, how somebody carries themselves. I want to follow somebody who leads with respect and authority, not somebody who's loud and telling me what to do. So, I'm curious, with that being said, can someone lead powerfully without being loud? And with that, what does ego-less leadership look like? And what does it not look like?
Well, I define leadership that's ego-led as being self-serving. So we all have ego. It's a part of who we are, but we don't have to allow our ego to lead, meaning the decisions and the things we do take other people into account. It's not all self-serving. And we can 100% influence others, which is the definition I like to use of leadership. It's ethical influence of others. 100%, we can do that quietly, from behind or from the side, leading by example, sharing our positive energy and warm smile and love with others and lifting them when they're feeling down. You never know the influence that you could have on someone else when you show up in that manner, and that is leadership. It doesn't have to be a title and that big name on the stage.
I was reading it's one of my favorite reviews I've ever read of a performance. David Denby of The New Yorker was reviewing Saving Private Ryan, and he was talking about the genius of Tom Hanks's performance in that movie. And he says it's amazing that unless the combat is so that he has to scream above what is happening, he talks about Tom Hanks as a leader in that movie. He says there is a gentleness to him that is contradicted by just enough pressure in his voice that people are willing to follow him when he says so. And he talks about the idea that his willingness to make an example of himself by going to the front and leading his men. But that pressure in his voice is the idea that one need not be a screamer or a shouter or a bellower. Mm-hmm. That simply the example followed by the purpose is often enough to push people to places where they might not be comfortable going if they were being led by ego-led leadership. Is that in the linguistic way we're kind of getting at here?
Absolutely. Your ability to lead is the influence that you exert, the positive influence on others. And we do that every day in many different ways. When you have a positive influence on the people in your sphere already, your family, your friends, your coworkers, we can influence them, and you don't need to be loud or pushy. You don't even have to tell them what to do. You can just be that positive role model and inspire them to behave in a different way that has a positive effect.
We're talking.
So it sounds like I'm sorry, I don't remember that movie, but it sounds like he was a very positive role model, and it wasn't just what he was saying, but what he was doing that had real impact.
We're talking with Cynthia Rivard. You can head over to cynthiarivard.com. The book is A New Breed of Leader, A Guide for Healing, Humanity, and Peaceful Revolution. And there in the subtitle is that term, peaceful revolution. And, there are early signs that change is happening, believe it or not. So I'm curious to you, what does a peaceful revolution actually look like in daily life? And what are those micro actions that we can all be a part of it?
Well, I guess the peaceful part is just that we need a lot of change in society. There's a lot of things that are broken. Violence is counteracting. It does not do any good and takes us in the opposite and wrong direction. So when we can lead peacefully and impact even the small changes in your community, your small, tight neighborhood or apartment building, make an impact in positive ways on things that make a difference to others, that is, of course, revolution are big changes, but it starts with small, at-hand ways that all of us can impact our own communities or families. That's how each one of us can contribute. And then as you take action, you may be inspired to do something on a bigger or grander scale, but don't wait and overthink it. Just take an action now to impact someone you're close to in a surprising and positive way.
I am going to actually take things in a little bit of a negative direction, not by way of bringing down the conversation with Cynthia, but by asking a question. So you talked about the idea of 99% of the time, what we perceive as a genuine threat is not. and I'm curious your thinking on this, is because of that, because too much of the time that it might only be 1 out of every 100, but people respond to every little thing as if it were a threat, that actually ends up that we become the creators of genuine threat by not de-escalating at the very source. That because we're behaving in this fashion, everything is a fight, everything is a conflict, that what we're really doing is genuinely guaranteeing it. And we desperately are trying to bring the temperature down before our actual delusions of conflict lead to a genuine one.
I'm not sure I understood the question, but it just brought to me when because there's so much threat, as you started out saying, most people now are experiencing the freeze response.
Right.
So there's a lot of things going on, and there's a lot of things we really should be paying attention to. And I'll keep it I think non-political. It should be non-political to say climate change is one of those. We could or should be paying attention to that, but it feels like change. So it feels like a threat. And so we go into freeze mode and pretend it doesn't exist, or, want to believe that it's just not real. It's being over amplified or whatever. That's a freeze response. We're hiding our head from something that is actually a very real threat that we should be paying attention to and turning around, doing what we can to turn it around, before we have even more dire circumstances than we do with all of the extreme weather events and such. So what we see, and it could have to do with all the bombardment of changes going on right now, but it's very common when you feel a potential threat to go into a freeze mode and ignore it, because quite often those threats do go away on their own. Like it's well, as an example, an opportunity that you kind of freeze on and don't take advantage of, it goes away. You didn't take action on it, it goes away. Whether that was a good or bad thing for you, you froze and ignored it. And so we see a lot of the freeze response right now from the number of people that are just not reacting at all. You see the fight response now as well, but there's still a lot of people in freeze mode.
That is really interesting. We got to wrap this up, Lindsay. That's a conversation worth having too. The idea that our freeze mode is not just is not responding to threats. We're freezing because we fail to recognize opportunity from threat, or be able to kind of see where the opportunity is in the threat, and we're actually missing really important moments that we could take advantage of if we would simply learn to be intuitive as opposed to threatened in that very moment. Cynthia, we got to call this a day. Lindsay, you got any room for?
Well, I wanted to make sure we mentioned that all proceeds from Cynthia's book here support Global Rising Tide, which they work to raise human consciousness and around combat global warming. So all proceeds from her book go toward the environmental link, the actions taking place here. So that shows you how much she believes in it, that she put all her love and passion and time into this book and is giving it back to the greater good. So Cynthia, again, head over to CynthiaRivard.com. You can find out more, see all the books, including Hope for a New Era, as well as A New Breed of Leader. Cynthia, we appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for raising human consciousness around here. We need more of your work, and we hope to have you back.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love chatting with you.